Welcome to My Life, Chassidus Applied, episode 488. This program is in loving memory of Miriam Bas Elio, Altei Salah Shalom, and in merit of Baruch Binyamin ben Menucha Lana, Alteis Yukusil ben Leah Rachel and Rachel Bas Liba Farkash, dedicated by Pinchas Taders ben Miriam and Sarah Bas Rachel Alteis. It's also dedicated in honor of our most mighty heroes, the soldiers fighting on the front lines to protect and defend men, women, and children in the Holy Land of Israel. May God protect them, protect Jews everywhere, release all the hostages unscathed, and may the merit of our discussions around Torah, around Chassidus, applying it to our lives, help speed up that process. So, yes, indeed, we are still dealing with the challenges. We are now entering, it's a happy Rosh Chodesh, Adar Sheni. We're now entering the second Adar this year because of the leap year, a month that is celebrated with joy. As Adar enters, we increase in joy. And now a second month of Adar, so it's even a greater increase. And of course, the paradox that while we're increasing in joy, we're also dealing with the challenges and the difficult challenges and losses and deaths and tragedies that have been going on for the last months, beginning with October 7th, or what we know as Shmini Atzeres and Simchas Torah. But as we've been discussing, joy in Judaism is not a contradiction to pain. Even when in pain, even when losses, joy is a deeper connection to something higher that gives you the strength to get through all challenges. So we shouldn't think of these months of Adar, and this now the second month of the Adar when we'll actually celebrate Purim in full glory, that indeed joy is part of the process of dealing with challenges. And look at the story of Purim. Purim is the most joyous holiday, a holiday that came out of darkness. That's why it's called Chodesh Hashanepach Lehem, the month that was transformed, not just the day, the month. Adar is a month of transformation. Transformation from what? From Yogin to Simcha, from sadness, from mourning and grief, which could have been, God forbid, that Haman fulfilled his plan of genocide of all the Jewish people, and that was transformed. So it's called Hashanepach Lahem. It was all transformed. And as such, that's what brought the deepest joy. So you look at the story of Purim, you see that though yes, indeed, the end of the story is a great miracle, but it all happened cloaked in the laws of nature. If you were living through those 9 years of the Purim story, you wouldn't necessarily notice something different was happening. But there was an inner choreography, an invisible hand at work. Achashverosh happened to throw a party, and he happened to then summon his wife Vashti, and she refused. So he happened to have her killed. Bigsan and Viserys were plotting a conspiracy, and Mordechai happened to listen in and overhear the conspiracy to kill the king, and he reported it. Esther happened to be the one that Achashverosh chooses as his queen. If you look at all the events, they all happened over a period of years, not in one moment. So as it was happening, it would seem like, seems like natural sequence of events. But when you look backwards, you connect the dots, you see a pattern emerging and continuing the story. And Mordechai happened to not bow down to Haman. The king happened to have insomnia. So after Haman plotted the genocide of the Jewish people, they were reading to the king about the heroics of how Mordechai saved his life, and the king wants to reward him. And the continuing story and ultimately unfolding into a tremendous victory. What do you see from that? That events can sometimes seem regular, routine, and they could even appear terrible. And they were terrible. And yet there was still an inner joy. Mordechai was connected to the divine. He would not bow to Haman. That connection prevailed. So though at the time we did not see it all, but it ends up being a tremendous celebration. And in many ways, it's even a greater celebration than a miracle that's revealed. It's revealed. Here it's happening, so to speak, as I said, cloaked in the natural events of things. So too now when we are fighting the war in Gaza, and we're dealing with real challenges in Israel and abroad and so on. So on the surface it may seem, this is a big setback. And in many ways, yes, we've suffered losses. But when you look at the bigger, deeper story, there's much to celebrate. That God is there to protect us. And that God is with us, even in darker times. So though God's name is not mentioned in the Megillah, but still, God's hand is at work. And the same thing now. So we celebrate, no, we don't celebrate, God forbid, a loss, but we celebrate that despite losses and despite the challenges, we will get through it all. And we will prevail and we will thrive and become stronger and greater than ever. And we will bring the ultimate peace, and the ultimate Moshiach will come. The ultimate Geula, redemption with Moshiach will come. And all will be then total and permanent harmony and peace in this world. So we don't forget that even in difficult times. So Adar this year has even deeper significance because of this additional challenge. We have to dig deeper and find that inner joy within. So it's a joy of our connection, of our purpose, of our destiny, that the end of the story will be a good one. And even now we see many miracles. When you look, the events, how people are being brought together, how people are celebrating. I mean, we all would have preferred all this didn't happen, but like with Purim, it did happen, and yet it will be a transformation. And just like Haman ultimately was hung on the gallows that he prepared for Mordechai, Hamas, which is Haman, just the difference is the N and the S, will also be hung on the very gallows that they prepared, God forbid, for the Jewish people. So that's a short introduction of the period that we're in the month, as I said, entering literally the Rosh Chodesh is today and tomorrow, the new month of the second Adar. So now it's an increased joy. After a full 30 days, now we have another continuation that continues to grow. And Misma Gula Gula, the redemption of Purim in this month, leads consecutively, immediately, into the next month of Nisan, the month of redemption. Okay. So as far as what does this week's Torah portion and time period teach us today, we covered the time period Adar. We'll soon talk about the Torah portion. But I want to speak about a few more things about the second month of Adar, a few questions that came in. So one question was asked, since it's Rosh Chodesh, let's begin with that. We know Rosh Chodesh represents, new month is the new moon. And we say, as we sanctify the moon, the Jewish people are compared to the moon, and we count by the moon. So it says, Shehem Asidim L'Schadesh Kamaisa. The Jewish people will be renewed like the month, like the new moon. And indeed, when is the first time the new moon is mentioned? Is right before the redemption from Egypt, where God shows Moses to look at the new moon. And just that this is the new moon, he says, this is the month that will become the month of redemption. In 2 weeks from now will be the full moon when the Jews will leave Egypt. And indeed, Purim is also a full moon. So someone asks a question like this: which is more powerful, the new moon of Rosh Chodesh or the full moon of the 15th of the month? Is Rosh Chodesh more important because it's the head of the month and gives energy to the entire month? Or is it the 15th of the month? Or is the 15th of the month more important when the moon is full and the full potential of energy is revealed? Okay, very good question. And let's elaborate a bit on the point. So even though the moon seems to be just another natural occurrence, but everything is for a purpose. Chassidus explains the sun and the moon represent two forms of energy. One is consistent energy. The sun, even though solar, we know there are solar storms and there are solar shifts, but the sun in general is a consistent light day after day. It's the moon that waxes and wanes and goes through its cycles. The new moon is the beginning of the month, then the first quarter, then comes the second quarter, the full moon, and the third quarter, and then again the process repeats itself. So the moon represents change, the ups and downs of life. And the same thing, the Jewish people, Hamoyer HaKotan, the small luminary which is the moon, the Jewish people are compared to the moon. Yaakov is compared to the moon. David is compared to the moon. These are all forces that represent but smallness may be in quantity, but it represents, in the language of Chassidus, bittul. The moon is a recipient. It receives the light of the sun, but in its bittul, in its selflessness, it can draw down something even greater than the mashpia, than the giver. That's why we find that it says that the giver receives more from the recipient than the recipient receives from the giver. Okay. And it's a long discussion in Chassidus about mashpia, makabel, the giving and the receiving, and we need both forms of energy. So on one hand, you can argue the new moon is really the ultimate, because the moon then completely disappears, only to be reborn again. The full moon, on the other hand, is a moon that's completely illuminated. And yet we find the concept of Kaima Sira Bashal Musa, a full moon, represents a fullness of, in the language of Chassidus, of Malchus. So Malchus, Lesla Megamo Klum, has nothing of its own. Its light is reflective and channeling the light of the sun, like a student. And yet it says that Malchus reaches the highest levels, the Etzem itself. And that's why you find Passover is on the 15th of the month, Sukkot is on the 15th of the month, Purim is on the 14th and 15th of the month. So the answer is, like always, each one has something that the other doesn't have. The Rebbe would often explain, when he speaks, he says, when you learn the discourses in Chassidus about Passover, you learn how Passover is the greatest holiday, greater than Sukkot and Shavuos. When you learn the discourses of Sukkot, you learn how Sukkot is the greatest. When you learn the discourses about Shavuos, Shavuos is the greatest. So which one is it? So the Rebbe explains, it's like the concept of mitzvah da'avazoyer beitfei. Every person has to do all the mitzvahs, but then there's the particular unique mitzvah that relates to that individual. We call it the shar, the gate through which all the other mitzvahs elevate. So on Passover, everything is elevating through Passover. That's the time, that's the energy of the time. It's like on Sunday is the day of Sunday, the energy of Sunday, and Monday is the energy of Monday. To say that one is greater than the other, each one in its time has its greatness, its uniqueness. You know, think of it like an example, a symphony. So you have many musicians, many instruments. You say, which is the greatest instrument? The answer is each one in its time. If you're not playing the instrument you should be playing at your time, then the whole symphony is compromised. Same thing with the human body. Which limb, which organ? The brain or the heart? This cell or that cell? So the same thing with Rosh Chodesh and the 15th of the month. Each one has something that the other doesn't have. Rosh Chodesh symbolizes the beginning, the birth. Think of a birth, the birth of a new cell. One cell is conceived. That's the beginning of everything. But on the other hand, the child is not complete until the 9-month cycle of pregnancy, and then the child is ready to emerge. So you'll say, which is greater? Without the conception, you'd never have the birth. But without the birth, you don't have the person functioning as a independent entity. So each one has its quality. The full moon represents the light, that the Makabel, Malchus, is the elevation of Malchus to be able to stand equal to its mashpia, like the student has reached the level of the teacher. And indeed, in Eitz Chaim, he talks about, Chassidus cites this in the beginning of the volume 3 of Ayin Beis, the part that was never delivered, called the Chelik Shnei Nemer. He talks about the 7 levels of the Li of Malchus. And then he talks even about an 8th level after Moshiach comes. So the concept of a recipient elevating is stage by stage, the cycles of the moon, and the full moon represents its complete elevation. Obviously, even more complete will be once Moshiach comes, that the light of the moon will be like the light of the sun, as discussed in these places. But Rosh Chodesh represents the beginning. It's like saying Rosh Hashanah. Rosh Hashanah is always Rosh Chodesh. It's the beginning of the year. So which is greater, the beginning of the year, Rosh Hashanah, B'kesel Yom Chagenu, Tiku B'chedesh Shefer B'kesel Yom Chagenu, or the 15th of the month, Sukkot, when it comes revealed. The Chassidus states, B'kesel Yom Chagenu. Revelation, revealing that which was concealed. So both have a quality that the other does not have. Similar to what you talk about the difference between Shammai and Hillel, when they discuss the Rosh Hashanah Leilonis, which is Chamisha Asar B'Shvat. According to Hillel, is the new year of the trees. According to Shammai, it's the first of the month of Shvat. So the explanation is the first of the month is B'Koyach, the potential for it. And the actualization is on the 15th. So each has a quality, and we have them both. So in the month of Adar today, we're celebrating the beginning of the second month of Adar, and then in 2 weeks we'll celebrate Purim, where it becomes revealed the full moon, the full revelation of it. And we need both. So you need the birthing and you need the expression of it. You can call it like the etzem and the giluyim, if you wish, in the language of Chassidus. Okay, the lesson to us is that we have both these lessons today. There are times where we may not see the full brightness of the moon because there are setbacks, there's concealments, but don't ever think there's no birthing happening. The birth is happening. And then there's the second half when it actually becomes revealed, and that's what we need it to be, completely revealed. And we'll see both, and both are part of the process. If there was no birthing in the first of the month, there wouldn't be the full moon on the 15th of the month. Okay. Do we have double amount of blessings in this leap year? Someone writes, did the Rebbe once tell a couple that was having difficulty having children, that during a leap year, there are extra brachas available for having children? What are some things that couples today having difficulties need to do to take advantage of and manifest these brachas? I don't offhand recall the Rebbe saying that. That doesn't mean he didn't say it, and I often do this intentionally. I'd love to have your feedback. Maybe there's someone that's familiar with a letter from the Rebbe, a note, an answer, or a sikha, or any source from the Rebbe that talks about a leap year offering extra brachas. The Rebbe in general says, and we discussed this in previous weeks, that a leap year, on one hand, it represents the deficit of the lunar calendar compared to the solar. But on the other hand, it's more than just filling the deficit. We fill it with a full month, which is almost three times the amount of the deficit. So there's an extra amount, and therefore there are extra blessings. So there's no question that point the Rebbe makes. Regarding having children, that I have not seen, but it's very possible because the moon does represent Malchus, and Malchus represents the Rechem, the womb, which is all about birthing, the birth of the new moon, the birthing of the moon, and then of course the development until you have the complete full moon. So if anyone has any information on that, please share it with me at ChassidusSupply.com, and you can just put in any source. If you like, you can add your email. Not necessary. This is also an opportunity if anybody wants to ask any questions completely anonymously, you can do that as well in the forum at ChassidusSupply.com. Now, what are the things that couples can do? Well, when you look in the Rebbe's directives, you have obviously all the things that the couples can do besides b'derech hateva and working with doctors and so on, whatever is possible, and hishtadlus, the efforts that we can do to be able to have children and be blessed with children. In a spiritual level, anything you deal with children, helping the education of children, either directly or through supporting it. The Rebbe in one letter says about opening up a camp for children. These are all channels that when you do that, you create a container, a keli, for actually having the birth of children in our lives. And we know there are times in the year like Lag BaOmer and other times where there are special channels that are opened. So in general, it's mida keneged mida. The more you help children, the more God will help you having children. And there are other things that are mentioned as well. But in general, it's anything connected in that level that is a sgula, that is a type of, I would say even more than a sgula, like a keli, a container, a channel for the blessings of having children. And may God indeed bless those that need a bracha in that area to be blessed with children, healthy children. And those that have children should be blessed with having healthy relationships and continuing to thrive and grow in those relationships. Okay, let's move from Adar to something that also happened just last night, which was the turning of the clock. So someone asked the question, is there anything from the Rebbe about the turning of the clock? We know that the spring forward, we turn the clock an hour ahead. Called daylight savings time, to give us another hour of day. I don't recall seeing anything from the Rebbe on this as well, but if anybody, again, knows anything on this, please share that. But based on the concept that the Rebbe speaks about, Chamisha Asar Ba'av, on the 15th of Av, is when the nights begin to get longer in Eretz Yisrael. And the end of Masechta Tainis, it talks about it. And therefore the Gemara says, since Lo Ivra Laila El Legirsa, the night was created only to study, so therefore it's a time where a person should start adding to the night becoming longer to study more Torah. Now, this doesn't mean that when the nights get shorter, we have to diminish, God forbid, in learning Torah. Talmud Torah Keneged Kulam. It's a mitzvah to learn Torah all the time. And we'll always look for every opportunity. But it could be that there are two ways, two dimensions in learning Torah. There's the Torah at night, which is more of a time, more conducive to meditation. It's quieter, easier to concentrate. But there's also Torah by day, of course. It says, and we talk about Vigisa b'yemim u'balayla, both by day and by night. So by day, Chassidus explains, and we talked before about the sun, is more of learning Torah, not necessarily, we talk about not the girsa. The girsa means, because at night you also could be tired, you may not be able to focus and concentrate. You can concentrate more because there are less distractions. But the strength and the ability for a person to really learn the most be'iyun in a depth way by day is more powerful. So you could also say that when you start having an extra hour, you should make sure to also increase in Torah, the daylight so-called level of Torah. And there's two different dimensions, so we have both elements. This is a thought that just, as we talk about the day, about this event, everything is divine providence. When you're given more time, more daylight time. In addition to other things that we do a day represents Gilui, Oir, Vayikra Lekim Le'er Yom, so it represents revelation. In a way, you can say the difference between the new month and the full moon is also the difference between when it's more night and more day when it's more bright. Just as examples for this idea. Okay. And of course, the lessons in life are, as we spoke before about Etzem and Giluyim, that in general we need both. We need to have day, we need to have night. Vayi Erev, Vayi Beker. Each one has its quality. In the language of Chassidus, you need the Helam, you need the Gilui, you need the Tzimtzum, the diminishment, the concealment, in order to have even a greater revelation. And that, of course, is appropriate, especially in our times where we need true revelation in the fullest sense of the word. With that, let's move over now to Parsha Pekudei. So this year, we separate Vayakhel and Pekudei, which is often read together. We discussed Vayakhel last week, which was the Parsha we read yesterday, also Parsha Shkolim. And this coming week is Parsha Pekudei, the last chapter, Torah chapter in the book of Exodus, Chazak. And so let's begin just the general theme of what is Pekudei. So Pekudei begins with El Pekudei, which is an accounting, the amounts that Moshe Rabbeinu collected when he built the Mishkan, the donations. So he's giving accountability. And the chapter continues about Moshe's accountability, the totals, talks about the anointment oil, which we'll discuss shortly, and other elements. And it concludes, interestingly, concludes that once they finished erecting and establishing the Mishkan, the sanctuary, so then the Shekhinah, which is the divine cloud, would come down, and then you knew that that's where the Shekhinah was present. When the cloud would rise, the Jews knew it's time to move on. So actually, in the chronology of Torah, it's always interesting to emphasize, is here in Parsha Pekudei, what happens is the cloud rests, and that's where they are, and the rest of Torah now, the whole book of Vayikra, the next entire book of Leviticus, the third book, all the way through chapter Bamidbar, Noseh, and in the middle of Ba'al Yisrael continues the theme that ends here, meaning everything in the chapter, the book of Leviticus, and the first 2.5 chapters of the book of Numbers of Bamidbar, all are happening in Rosh Chodesh Nisan during that period when the temple was established and the laws that Hashem told Moshe. Then it says in the middle of Ba'al Yisrael, and then on the 20th day of Iyar, the Anon, the cloud that came down at the end of Pekudei, now rose, and this was a sign they started to move further in the journeys, the 42 journeys through the 40 years in the wilderness. So Pekudei, in a way, is a very watershed moment. It's the conclusion of after leaving Egypt, Matan Torah, parting of the sea, Matan Torah, the building of the Mishkan, which was the last few chapters through Metitzava, Ki Tissa, Vayakhel, and Pekudei. And now comes the laws of establishing and dedicating the temple, the laws of the offerings, which is the Sefer Vayikra, and then the journeys will continue, as I said, later in Bamidbar. So the lessons for us are, life is a journey. We're all traveling through Midbar Amim, the wilderness of the world. And now actually in the wilderness of the world, which is the Sinai wilderness, not far from there is Gaza. And we're traveling through wilderness physically and also spiritually. But we know this, the Shekhinah is with us. It's with us. It's either with us, resting with us, and when Moshe speaks to Hashem and Hashem speaks to Moshe, or even when the Shekhinah rises, it doesn't leave us, it just tells us now's the time to move to the next stage. So the lesson is very clear in our times. And the beginning of the chapter talks about accountability. So let's talk about what is the power of accountability. Accountability is one of the most important things in life. One of the key things to remember in relationships. Let's talk about marital relationship. So a couple love each other, but it's inevitable. Human beings are flawed. We will make mistakes. If you're looking for perfection in a relationship, that's an illusion. What you're looking for is not perfection, you're looking for accountability. Trust is not built on perfection, it's built on accountability. So even when a person makes a mistake, they're honest about it. They don't cover it up, they don't lie. When Moshe was on Mount Sinai, the last chapters, praying for forgiveness for the Jewish people after building the golden calf, it was about accountability. He was saying, yes, a mistake was made. Terrible error. Mistake. It could have been a deliberate one. It was deliberate in some ways. But we're accountable. We have a relationship. We owe accountability to you. And that's critical. So the general context of things, here the context is that he had raised money for the Mishkan and Moshe was giving an accounting to the people he raised from. Not because they didn't trust him, because that's the right thing to do. Someone does something for you, someone donates, you have to give them accounting. Total transparency, as they call it. Which in general is a rule that's necessary for people to trust you, that you're transparent, you have accountability. But accountability is also a lesson in general in life. So we have a whole chapter in the Torah that talks about being accountable. Which says essentially is, I may not be perfect, but I will always be accountable to you. I will always be honest with you. I will always acknowledge a mistake. I won't try to hide it or cover it up. And that's where you build trust. Because if you're expecting a person is never going to make a mistake, it's inevitable they will. But if you're expecting that even when they do, they're honest and they're straightforward about it, there's integrity, that's where trust is built. Think about it. A tremendous lesson in life. So a few other questions regarding this chapter is about the Shemen HaMishcha. So it talks about anointing the vessels in the temple as they dedicated the temple. It says you take oil, it's called the oil of anointment. Later this would also be used to anoint kings. That's why Moshiach is called Moshiach. Moshiach means the anointed one. But this time, a one-time basis, they anointed the vessels with oil. So someone asked the question, why were the vessels anointed with oil? What is the holy anointing of oil Moses used to sanctify the tabernacle? Is it the same oil they used to anoint kings and prophets? Did they use actual oil, or does the Bible use oil as a metaphor for what oil represents on a spiritual level? How can we use this oil or what it represents to lubricate our souls so they can run smoothly? Well said, and that exactly carries the answer to it. So, a short introduction. One of the key beautiful things that Chassidus teaches us is that everything has a body and a soul. The body is the physical object and its properties and its features. But the physical is like a body, a container for divine energy. So water, just as we say in science, water is made up of H2O, hydrogen, oxygen. Molecules, which in turn are made up of atoms, in turn made up of subatomic particles. Water also represents spiritual energy called chesed, love. Fire represents gvura. Fire is gvura, severity, strength. So when you talk about oil represents something. The reason there's a physical oil in this world because it represents a spiritual side of it. And the features of oil themselves represent that. So when you look at oil, what are the things that jump out at you without even thinking? Number one, oil saturates. You get your hands covered in oil. It's not that easy to get rid of. It becomes a nuisance. But on the positive side, oil saturates. Water does not. Whatever it touches, oil begins to penetrate. On the other hand, oil always remains removed. You put oil with water, the oil will rise. It remains, we'll call it transcendent. So based on these physical features, we learn that oil represents spiritually the same idea. It's something that permeates. It doesn't just superficially affect you, it affects you through and through. Mefafea l'chol davar, it says. It saturates the entire thing. When you consecrate something with oil, you're showing that it's completely being submerged in the purpose for which it was created. In this case, with the Mishkan, with the tabernacle, the vessels, for the purpose that what God created. So the vessels were dedicated to that, but the oil represents a form of anointment that sanctifies it. The same thing, that's why you say, Shemen HaMishcha, when Shmuel anointed Shaul, the first king, and then later the other kings were anointed. It's all designated as something specific. So the oil is completely saturating the entity, but it also demonstrates a certain like kedusha that's higher and above. That's why they use Shemen Zayin. We use pure olive oil for the menorah. Oil has another feature. You press the olive and you draw the oil. Oil is not produced unless you press it. It comes through pressure, which is the lesson that the deepest part of our resources, we see today how oil is necessary for energy, doesn't come easily. It comes through pressure, whether it's pressure under the ground or pressure in an olive. So difficulties can draw out from you that deeper oil within us all. So in the context that you're describing, you say that so the fact is the actual oil was used, because in Torah it's not just the spiritual significance of it, it's also the physical object. It manifests in the physical world. Everything wants to be manifest in this world, not just a symbol. So it's actual oil, but it also represents lubricating our souls so they can run smoothly. Exactly, that's what oil does. And that's what oil should do. That's why you find Hanukkah, the story of Hanukkah is around oil. The lighting of candles in general, the menorah, as I mentioned. That's all part of the lessons that we can learn from oil. And finally, why does a cloud signify the presence of the divine? Why is it significant that a cloud hovered over the Mishkan to let us know that the divine presence wanted to dwell there? What is it about clouds specifically? If I'm sitting in Prospect Park and some clouds pass by, does it mean the divine presence wants to dwell in my picnic? Okay, glad you're making it practical. So just as I spoke about oil, the same thing with clouds. Now God could have made many ways that rain should be produced. What is it about clouds? And we find, besides the physical properties of clouds, we find indeed the Anani HaKavod, the clouds that surrounded and protected the Jewish people as they went through the wilderness, and the cloud that rested on the Mishkan. God couldn't find another way to symbolize it. So cloud is, if you think about clouds and you see the different, you can say lahavdil, poems, descriptions of clouds, it has a certain angelic, a certain sublime element. It's very ethereal. You know, you go through a cloud, on one hand it's there, on the other hand, does it occupy really space? It looks like the white, fluffy clouds. Many people, it takes on different shapes. So cloud is a symbol of divine presence. That's exactly right. Obviously the cloud has no power of its own. It's symbolic. And the cloud, its very nature, tells you it's there, but it doesn't have substance. And it has that element of, like I said, an angelic look to it, angelic feel to it. You talk about being like, as people say, I'm in cloud 9, representing an ecstatic state, an elevated state. And the clouds hover in heavens. I mean, you think about it, it sparks the imagination, it sparks creativity, a certain visualization. So God indeed put into nature different things that evoke a certain awe, a certain sense of higher presence. To say every time you see a cloud that means that God is speaking to you, maybe he's hugging you, maybe he's sending you a message. But the truth can be said about everything in beauty, everything in nature. So I'm not going to say that if you see a cloud coming, it's a God is sending this specifically, I'm dwelling among you or among those that are, but we look for godliness everywhere, so why not? But when we going back to the story in the Torah, The cloud represented that when Moshe, when the Shekhinah is there, Moshe would enter, and the cloud would hover and like encompass. It was like a hug, and a type of enclosure. And that's when Moshe experienced the divine communication, the divine intimacy. And a cloud is that. It's a makif. It surrounds. It's all encompassing. It's engulfing. It's a type of. It completely we get submerged in it, and that's the key symbolism of it. I'm sure in Sfarim talk more about it, but these are a few key points to mention, and that we can learn the lessons from it. Okay. Being that yesterday was Vayakhel Parshas Shkolim, I have a few questions that came in about that, so let me address Shkolim. How is giving a half shekel donation to the Mishkan an atonement for the grievous sin of the golden calf? And if giving the half, that's one question. Okay, we'll deal with the second question afterwards. So this indeed is one of the reasons that Moshe Rabbeinu was surprised, and he didn't know. Niskasha Moshe, there are things that we know Moshe heard from Hashem. So it says, Zeh Yitnu. It talks about in the beginning of Parshas Ki Tissa that we also read yesterday, Parshas Vayakhel, Parshas Shkolim. Zeh Yitnu. L'chapra al nafshei seichem. So one of the explanations is because the Machzor Shekel indeed was an atonement for the golden calf. What's the connection? And it applies today as well. We know it's tzedakah. It's tatzal mamov. Tzedakah is a way of atoning for things that are negative things. So Hashem sold Moshe a matbeah shel eish, a coin of flame, a fiery coin. What's the connection to that? And the answer, many different answers given, but one answer is because when you give tzedakah, you're not just giving a coin to help someone. The coin becomes fire. You're taking this ultimate quintessential symbol of materialism called money, and you're turning it into a divine fire. And that's what showed Moshe, that's how you forgive. The golden calf, they took money, gold, and they turned it into a golden calf, an idol. You want atonement for that? You have to take the very gold, the money, and now direct it toward godliness. Not enough just to do tshuva belev in your heart, but actually take the most physical, like he explains in chapter 37 in Tanya, the power of tzedakah. Because tzedakah represents chaya nafshi, your entire soul energy. So when you give tzedakah, tzedakah is shkula keneged kol ha-mitzvos, mekareves ha-geula, because tzedakah is taking your whole animal soul. Money represents your ingenuity, your time, your creativity. That's why it's so difficult to give. But when you do give, you're giving from your very chaya nafshi, from your very flesh. And that's the tikkun, the ultimate tikkun. Just as their passion was misdirected, God forbid, toward a false god, the correction is to take that very gold, instead of worshiping yourself and worshiping your money, directing it toward godliness, taking it and turning it into a machzor shekel, that in turn is to bring the offerings in the temple, the public offerings. And the same thing when we give charity today. Yes, it's good to say, my heart is with you, and all kinds of other good deeds, but there's nothing like taking your physical money and turning it into kedusha, into a matbeah shel eish, into fire. And fire, we know, is transcendent. It defies gravity. It rises. It's one of the explanations in understanding this. And it also manifests in the physical sense of the word. So then comes the next question. If giving the half shekel was supposed to be an atonement, why wasn't that generation completely forgiven? Even though they made the donation, they were still punished by perishing in the desert and not being allowed to enter Eretz Yisrael. So first of all, they were forgiven. That's Yom Kippur. Yom Kippur is Yom HaKippurim. Salachti kidvorecha. I've forgiven them. Why was not a permanent forgiveness? And Moshiach came because there's still work to be done. And we still have the elements of the Avodah Zarah, of the Chet HaEgel, that still exists in every sin, as Rashi brings. It's like many things. It opened the door, but it still has not finished the work. Them not going into Eretz Yisrael is another discussion. Why? Whether that's because of the Chet Egel or Chet HaMeraglim, or connected to both of them. That's not necessary for here. What it comes down to it is when Eden gives tzedakah, especially today, the outpouring of how much money has been pouring out for Eretz Yisrael, for our soldiers, for terrorists, for victims of terror and victims of this terrible war and so on, is all telling us that we're taking our very physical beings and we're turning it into something holy. So that's a very immediate lesson for events of today. So this is a good transition to continue discussing some elements of the Gaza War. So a teenager writes like this. A teenager asks, how can I deal with my fear that history may be repeating itself as our enemies attack us? So more specifically, hi, I'm a teenager in Crown Heights. I listen to your podcast on YouTube and Spotify, and I would like to say how grateful I am for them. My question is, in schools they always repeat, history repeats itself, quote unquote. And this scares me. Is it true? Even for the horrible, horrible things that happened to the Jewish nation, like the Holocaust on October 7th, is this true? I try to find comfort in the idea that Hashem is always watching, but I can't help but think that all the horrible times in history when, yes, the Jewish people were saved, but many were killed. How is that still a miracle to be in awe of? Yes, it's amazing that yet some were saved, but what about the ones that were not saved? Okay, so this is a question that I'm sure all of us have, but coming from a young person, I think it's appropriate to address. And as I've said many times, I am not going to give you an answer, a logical answer to explain why Hashem allows things like this. Yes, He tells us, I protect you, but we'd love the protection to be such that it shouldn't happen in the first place. So that's another discussion, but the key is not to point fingers and the key is not to blame anyone. The key is that there are things we don't understand. But the same Hashem that presents these challenges also gives us the strength to deal with it. And that's what you need to know. Yes, it's true that many people died in history. And until Moshiach comes, we don't have a perfect answer. But we are here. We're here. The Jewish people have survived. Nations and empires are all gone. Our persecutors, far greater numbers, far more money, far more power, far more territory, and so on, are not here anymore. So it's not a nachama, it's not a comfort that helps us minimize in any way, God forbid, the losses that we've incurred. Including the ones that the 1,000, who knows how many, 1,200, 1,400 people that were so massacred on Shmini Atzeres this year. And that continued to unfortunately fall. So this is not about explaining that away. But overall, we have to remember, like the story of Purim, we're here to talk about it. And that should give us strength and hope that there are challenges, and this should be the last one to find before the Geula itself comes. Be around people who find that deeper strength. Ask yourself not why, or be afraid of what's possible, what may happen because it happened in the past. Your key focus should be, what are you going to do about it? Focus on that and act. That is the best remedy to all these fears. Because whatever someone says, you could always say, well, how do you know anything could happen? But when you get yourself busy with helping people, helping families of the soldiers, of the hostages, of people who have lost family members and casualties, focus on helping. And the more you focus on helping, that's how you remedy, that's how you ultimately bring healing to yourself and to everyone around you. Another person asks, is it possible that all the trials and tribulations we have been through, from the Spanish Inquisition to the Holocaust and the current war in Gaza, are all part of Hashem's plan to make us tougher and stronger people, so that we can be ready for the new era of Moshiach? There's a teaching in Chassidus that an olive only gives oil when it's squeezed, like we mentioned before. Maybe Hashem feels we need this war in Gaza, as painful as it is now, for the greater good that will come out of it, because when we are stronger people, we will then be absolutely ready for Moshiach. We don't try to explain away and justify God's allowing such things to happen. It's best to leave that in the middle of the mystery. What we have to answer is, once it happened, yes, it definitely can make us stronger, and it should make us stronger. But I want to stay away from explaining it that way, because we always can ask the question, Hashem is kol yachol. He could have done it a different way. Does it have to be that painful? And you tell a mother or a father or a family member, this happened to make you stronger. It's just not adequate. It's not even appropriate. So I think we have to separate between the mysteries why God could have done it a different way, especially after everything we've already endured. We need another thing like this. But after the fact that it makes us stronger, absolutely. As they were oppressed, they flourished and thrived. That's exactly right. The olive's lesson of the olive, which again is perhaps a lesson about anointment, why we anoint with oil. So oil represents that, and represents in life the idea that challenges bring out the deeper strengths. May we only have those strengths and no longer have the negative part of it. Okay. And that we come away stronger than ever, and yes, ready to march straight into the Gula with all the metal that has been hardened over the years, especially in the last years of the challenges we have faced. Okay, a few questions that have come in, and I want to again use this opportunity to welcome your questions. Even if your question has not been answered yet, it will be. There is a backlog, I have to admit, and many, many questions come in, far more than I can answer every week, but I try to consolidate them and address them, especially the more timely ones. So please don't hesitate. And you go to ChassidusApply.com. There's a forum where you can ask any question. Nothing's taboo. Nothing's off limits. That has been the motto, the brand, if you wish, of this program from its inception over 11 years ago. So with that, let's go to a few questions that have come in. Listening to a song about God sung by a non-religious person. So the question is it appropriate to listen to a new song, Am Yisrael Chai, sung by a non-observant person? And here's the question. Recently, a new Israeli song by a singer, well, I don't usually like to mention names, but I'll mention it in this case, Eyal Golan, called Am Yisrael Chai, has become popular worldwide among many Yidden. The singer isn't yet a Torah-observant Jew, that's well said, and has tattoos, yet sings about HaKadosh Baruch Hu in this song. What would the Chabad Rebbeim say about hearing music from non-observant Yidden who may have a good message? Is this similar to hearing a non-observant Jew sing about Hashem? Is it appropriate for a God-fearing Jew to listen to him sing this song? Is it appropriate to hear a different observant Jew sing this song which he composed? What should a parent do if they hear their children playing this song from the singer, either themselves or in front of younger siblings? The child claims that Quell Yisrael has accepted this song. Okay. So, we'll go from the top down, so to speak. We know there's a sikhs from the Rebbeim that talk about different levels of songs. The holiest level of a song is composed by a Rebbe himself. Songs we know composed by a Rebbe, by a tzaddik, songs that were composed in the time of the Beis Hamikdash by the Levim. Then there's songs that were accepted by tzaddikim, may have been composed by someone else, by a chassid, not a Rebbe necessarily. Then there are songs that were sung that were not necessarily coming from there, but it was also embraced, but all by authorities. And then there's the songs that, as you go down the rung, all the way to songs of shtus, to the point of even songs from the Ummah, composed by people with bad intentions or people who who had nothing to do with godliness and just reflecting their own inner passions. So overall, obviously we know that a person should be kadosh atzmach b'mutalach, meaning that we should always sanctify our lives. Even the things that are permitted, famous expression from the Rebbe, that which we're not allowed to do, for sure we're not allowed to do. And even that which we're allowed, we also don't have to. So if you talk about the higher standard, obviously you shouldn't do anything that's out of the world of Kedusha. Especially when it comes to Nigun, Chassidus talks about the power of a song. It touches the deepest part of your soul. And it also reflects the deepest part of the composer's soul as he expresses himself. So though he doesn't talk about it in chapter 8 in Tanya when he talks about Chachams, Chitzenius, philosophy and so on, but in a similar way as well, a song coming from a place of tumah, of impurity, has a particular power, more than even just wisdom, because it's a song, it touches deeper into the heart. So in answering this question about this song or any song, you have to ask yourself, where do you stand? And this is something I can't really answer for you because I'm not necessarily familiar with your situation. There are people who read books, read newspapers, read many things that are not necessarily things they should read. I'm not talking about dvarim asurim, things that are completely prohibited or forbidden. Even reshus. So you have to talk to your mashpia, see where you stand. The highest standard, we know what the standard is. The question is what's practical for you to do. So a person will say, I won't listen to this song, but then you see them reading a newspaper or you're reading a book that's just equally problematic, perhaps. So you have to be consistent, even though you could say, once again, two wrongs don't make a right, I understand that. But I mean to say, just be realistic with where you stand regarding this. And here again, I would say, if this song is sung, let's say by a rally or by an event, do you have to walk out or something? Because it's sung by a non-observant person or it's composed by one? I wouldn't say that. This also has to know to what extent. Should it be something you should introduce your children to? This comes down to what other things you introduce them to. So I'm not trying to avoid the question, I'm trying to just put it into context based on where you stand. In essence and concept, yes, the highest standard you should be doing only Kedusha. Now let's talk about the topic itself. Is it possible for a non-observant Jew to sing to God? Of course. Can a non-observant Jew, when I say non-observant externally, at least like you said, not yet, is he allowed to daven? Is he allowed to daven at the Amid? Let's say he has to say Kaddish or daven at the Amid because of a yahrzeit. So, in many shuls, why not? Now, some shuls may have a standard that they, whatever the reasons they don't, who they decide is a chazan, a shliach tzibur. But of course, he's allowed to daven, and he's allowed to sing a song. Question is whether you should be listening to the song. Is it for you? That again goes back to my initial point. So the idea that a non-observant person, at least externally, is singing to God, especially in a time like this, in a way you could say is very beautiful. He's talking that even a person like him is talking about Hashem and invoking Hashem's name and doing it from his heart. It can be very inspiring. Is it a mitzvah to listen to it like you listen to a nigun from a Rebbe? No, obviously I'm not going to compare the two. So again, it's all about context. And in that sense, there's a certain beauty to that. You have to determine whether it's something you want to expose yourself or your family to. But I wouldn't go to war about it. That for sure not. Because you have to also choose your priorities. Especially in a time like this, a person singing a song has become accepted. So I'm not saying it's sanctifying it. But at the same time, it's coming from pure intentions and good intentions. The fact that the singer may not reflect the highest standard, and what about singers who may dress the part, but they also, if you really start digging deep, you find they also don't reflect the highest standard. So it's just external look. Do we start digging into every book and every author and every article and every song we sing of what kind of Yiras Shamayim the singer has while he's singing or before he's singing or afterwards? So you see, you have to contextualize this, and let's not all become all hysterical because the person has a tattoo, or is, people come to your Shabbos table, they sing a nigun with you, and they're getting seder, and they start crying. That may be the opposite. You have to look at it. That the tattoo and all the external things that were mentioned here, that's not the real him. It's Yitzrei hu she'anseh, in the words of the Rambam. That's his external part. His real person is neshama. Maybe he's singing from his neshama. So I'm not looking just to be melamed schus. I'm just saying you have to broaden the picture when you talk about a topic like this, especially in times like this, where even, as the Alter Rebbe says in Tanya, even a kal shebekalim during a time of Mesiras Nefesh, a time of challenge, will have Mesiras Nefesh for Elokus and so on. So in that sense, there's certain beauty to that. And I've seen it myself. I've met people who may not have known better, Tinuk Shenishba, but certain crisis came and they touched a part of them and they sang a song that was ma'eded many. So that's some of the context of it. And hopefully that covers the spectrum on this topic. Okay. There are many questions, more questions I want to cover. Let me see what I'll do here. Let me do a Moshiach follow-up, even though there's a lot to do there. But I'll do one at least. And then I'll do another 2 questions. So here's the question about Moshiach follow-up. Last week we spoke about it. Specifically, the Rebbe's focus that the world is ready, we have to open our eyes, birurim were finished. So we discussed that. We discussed also whether there's a change, Tov Shinun. Someone asked the question about, so let me cover that, Tov Shinun, and then I'll ask the follow-up. Hi, Rabbi Jacobson. Wondering if you might have some thoughts on this. In regards to the Rebbe's teachings, would you say the Sichos of Nun Aleph Nun Beis, that's basically Tov Shinun Aleph Nun Beis, that would be 1991, 1992. The 2 years, they go back 32 years ago, right before the Rebbe had the stroke, which is literally yesterday. Shabbos Parshas Vayakhel was the last Shabbos, the Esata that we heard the Rebbe speak to us. And then Chof Zayin Adar came. So someone writes, would you say that these sichos from those years came to teach a new path in Avodah for our generation? And if so, can you shed light on what would be the difference between before Nun Aleph Beis and afterward? It seems that all too often people make big distinctions between Nun Aleph Beis, and after that is a totally different Avodah and directive from the Rebbe. I'm asking from a place of trying to understand the Rebbe's teachings as we try to learn every Maimer and Sikha from the first years of the Nesias, the Rebbe's leadership, and for some reason some seem to hold off learning these later years. I realize there are tons of Sikhas there, but if there's a new direction theme in those years, is that something you can elaborate on? And also, can you give a general background as to why there might be a controversy over these sichos? And in your opinion, what you think would be the approach to those sichos and how to actualize the directives they teach? Thank you very much. So this is very fitting because, as I said, we're now 32 years from the time the last Fabrengen, the Rebbe, till this day, spoke to us Vayakhel. So the first thing, let me just make this clear. You can't split a Rebbe into parts. Just like you can't split the Torah into parts. So I want to say that the Torah I heard from Moshe by Matan Torah is one thing, and the Torah that I heard from him 40 years later is another, God forbid. God forbid. The same Rebbe that spoke in Tov Shin Yud Aleph is the same Rebbe spoke in Tov Shin Nun Beis. To start splitting, based on what? And based on your logic, as if your logic is the dictator here. It's all Shchinim Medaberes Metegrein if you believe in a Rebbe. The Moshe Rabbeinu speaking to us, the divine words that he spoke, Divrei Tzadikim Kayomim La'ad, and that's that. Whether you understand it more or less, that's, like the Rebbe says many times, Imreiku Mikemu. If it's empty, means you don't understand it, it's because something's missing in you, not because, God forbid, there's a change. So we have to take what the Rebbe said literally. At the same time, as I always emphasize, we don't add, we don't subtract. What the Rebbe said, he said, especially what he edited is printed, and that's that. There's no two ways about it. You start splitting that and say, this year, then someone says, maybe let's go another 5 years back. Who decides where exactly? I mean, we've suddenly become the arbiters of the Rebbe's authority. I mean, to me, it's just ludicrous. You don't want to accept what the Rebbe says as emes lamite from the beginning? That's your choice. But to start splitting and say what he said, and we know that Chassidim, if the Rebbe a doctor told, God forbid, that you should do an operation, and the Rebbe said, don't do it, a Chassid would listen to the Rebbe, even it came to life and death. So suddenly we're starting to split where the, so that's one thing, let's make that very clear. Second point, let me say this. Therefore, so the Sichos of Aleph and Beis, absolutely, the Rebbe accelerated the theme of Moshiach very, very clearly, and said, as I mentioned last week and I mentioned many times, that the Rebbe used to say earlier, before that we darf noch zuputzen the Kneplach, the language of the Friedrich Rebbe, Simchas Teire Peites, Tofresh Peites. They still polish the buttons. And then the Rebbe said the buttons were also polished. If you want a Sikha that really lays it out clearly, look at the Sikha of B'cho Yevorech Yisrael, which is the Sikha of the Rebbe Chof Beis Shvat, connected to Chof Beis Shvat, Tov Shinun Beis. He clearly speaks about three tkufas, the tkuf of Tov Shin Yud, Tov Shin Yud Aleph, and Tov Shin Mem Ches after the Istalkus of the Rebbe. And you see clearly, he makes it clear there's stages and makes total sense. That the Gilui of Elikus, the Gilui of Moshiach, comes in stages. And there he distinguishes. He doesn't distinguish Nun Beis and Nun Aleph from before that, but definitely Mem Ches, Tov Shin Mem Ches. And then in Mem Ches itself, after Mem Ches, there's other stages. So that I would look in that Sikha and you'll have all the details necessary there. Different levels of integrating Elikus, godliness into the world. So that's my general response to these questions. And let me see if I covered all the details that you asked. So bottom line is we need to learn them. We need to understand the whole picture. And especially those sikhs after Chof Ches Nissen, when the Rebbe said, I did everything. You cut that out, God forbid. You're missing a key piece. The Rebbe said, I did everything, and now do it. So someone's going to say, no, I don't want to hear that sikha. Ridiculous. Purim Mem Zayin, the Rebbe basically said the same thing. So to start, again, dividing which doesn't make any sense at all. And on the contrary, to me, that's like mamish kfirah for that matter. It's like denying the truth of the Rebbe's words. You want to be mafalpa what they mean? Fine. But what they say, they say. Okay. So with that said, let's go to the follow-up I was going to do. Dear Rabbi Jacobson, on your Sunday class, you mentioned that the Rebbe said close to 35 years ago that Moshiach is here, all we need to do is open our eyes. One explanation you gave it as to why we don't see the full revelations of Moshiach that we have been promised is that many of us are still traumatized from gullus and battle fatigues from the long spiritual war. We may need time for our wounds to heal before we are ready and able to open our eyes and see that we are in a new consciousness of Moshiach. May I ask for further clarification? Has the Rebbe ever said how long this healing process will take until we are able to open our eyes? And what physical and spiritual therapies and treatments we can do to speed up the healing process? I'm personally not sure why we need a long 35-year healing process to be ready to open our eyes. When we go back to the end of World War II, the moment it was announced the war was over, spontaneous dancing broke out in the streets with soldiers and civilians together. There are famous photos from Times Square in New York. Nobody in the crowd said, let's wait 35 years until our physical and emotional wounds heal before we celebrate and transition from war to peace. I guarantee that if Mashiach is in a physical body walked into shul and said, the time for redemption has arrived, so let's go to Israel together to see the Beis HaMikdash, I'm sure nobody would tell Mashiach, let's wait 35 years until our wounds heal, and then we will go with you. We would break out into spontaneous celebration and be joyous. So what's the bottom line? Is Mashiach here or is he not actually here yet? Or in short terms, if it's dependent on us opening our eyes, how long will that process take? Well, the Rebbe never said it has to take a lot of time. He actually expected and was giving us strength that it should happen right away in Tov Shinun Aleph when he said it Chof Ches Nissen or other such similar sikhs, open your eyes. He didn't say, I'm telling you now it's going to take a long process. Remember, that's a psychological thing. If we are not open to it, we're asleep, or our consciousness is still in Golas mentality, the Rebbe Kavyachal saying, I can't change that. You have to wake yourself up. So it should have and could have happened immediately. No one ever said that it has to take all these years. I'm not trying to point fingers on us, because you could always say, have Rahman Safidin, what do you want? But I look at myself and I'm saying, no, I didn't do what I had to do. And that's what a responsible person says. Let's do it now at least. So I'm not looking to say this needs, if you're going to ask the question, the Rebbe is saying, yes, I'm not just going to bring the Geula and impose it on you. You have to do something. The answer is yes, because we may be traumatized, or whatever word you want to use, the Golos type of consciousness, and that has to change. So it's up to us to change that. And it does not have to take long, especially if you read the Rebbe Sichos and you live with them and you integrate them. Why not? Why shouldn't that happen immediately? Like the Rebbe said, Chof Zayin, then the ikar is to go out of your Golos Pnimi, your internal Golos, meaning your consciousness, your attitude, your psyche. So, by all means. Yes, of course it'd be easy. Moshiach walks in and just says, here, let's all go. But for some reason, we need a mamata lamayla, something that we are doing. It shouldn't just be that, okay, Moshiach is lifting us up. Something that we have changed, we have shifted, which makes the dira b'tachtenim deeper. We'd love to have it. It's like the derech harucha ktsara of Tanya. Derech harucha, but then it's derech ktsara. The harucha is because it's integrated. It comes through our effort. It comes through our contemplation. That's the short answer for that question. Okay. We'll do one more question, which is a timely one. Actually, one of the more painful ones I'd rather not do, but it's part of reality, so let's just do this. And is it appropriate for women to go on a mikveh strike in order to coerce the men in the community to put pressure on a get withholder? So here's the question more specifically. Dear Rabbi Jacobson, recently there has been controversy and protests in a particular community about a man who refuses to give his wife a get, a divorce. A woman on social media suggested that all women agree to a mikveh strike in order to inspire all the men in the community to put pressure on the get withholder. Something similar was done in ancient Greece 3,000 years ago, when the women decided to withhold intimacy until their husbands agreed to end the war with Sparta, and it worked. Can this idea also potentially work in the get withholding situation, or is it a bad idea? So, as you know, this is not a platform for halacha here, psak, din. This is a shaila for a rav. But if I may, I'll take a little liberty and say the following. It's not appropriate for a woman to withhold going to the mikveh, no matter what the cause is, unless the pekuach nefesh mamish and a rav paskins like that. So I would not say, because then the question is, where do you stop? There are a lot of important causes. And just because someone makes the suggestion, that doesn't mean that we have a license to do so. But still, if you have this question, ask your local rav, ask a competent authority. And I would see it as a personal question, not necessarily a collective question. I mean, we have the story with Ein ben Peles, his wife, who sat at the front of the tent, and she by doing so, she essentially coerced, or she seduced, or inspired her husband not to join Koirach. But that's a different story. That's the exact opposite, actually. Through love she did it, not through withholding. So I'm not saying that's the method to be used, but if you really care, there are ways to do it al pi Torah, and I wouldn't start employing methods of this nature. This opens up a Pandora's box of all kinds of things that can be problematic. And who knows how it will be interpreted, and a woman uses, is it just doing it for that reason? I mean, it's complicated. So I would not endorse it. I'm not here to come out and criticize. I understand the intentions are good. A get withholder is a terrible thing. You want to find all kinds of ways to pressure. But that's briefly the answer. And in general, again, these are halachic questions that have to be very careful. Ben ish le'ishteh, husband and wife, shalom bayis, and things of this nature. We have enough challenges. We don't have to add a new one. But this, again, does not mean we should be complacent about this issue. I am pushed and said many times, this is a crisis of our times, that the Rabbanim must come up with a solution. We can't ignore it. And all the pressure in the world has to be put al pi halacha on people who can be novel b'reshus hatera, obnoxious, and more than obnoxious, despicable in the name and using Torah to protect themselves. But Misayim b'teiv, let's not conclude with that. Let's go back to the Moshiach. So Moshiach, bottom line, from the Rebbe's point of view, is very clear. There needs to be done something by us, even etzbek tana. And the rest will be done from Milmaila. We must do what we have to do. And especially with this Chassidus now, this is a wake-up call. Everybody's on edge. Everybody is alert. Nobody's complacent with when you see what's going on in Eretz Yisrael, outside of Eretz Yisrael, different countries of the world. So it's a wake-up call that we have to take full advantage of to inspire ourselves and everyone around us to do whatever it takes. As the Rebbe declared back in Chof Zayin in 1967. The Shofar Gadol sounded to wake up those lost amidst prosperity and comfort and opulence, and those that were pushed away in Nedachim Eretz Mitzrayim, the downtrodden, due to the challenges of poverty and affliction and oppression. But then comes Lishtachvis Hashem, to prostrate, to bow to Hashem al Har Kodesh. That's up to us. So we have a tremendous, once in a lifetime, historical opportunity, I would say once in history opportunity, to use this wake-up call and do whatever it can to wake up ourselves, to wake up our friends, our communities, people that we don't recognize or know, but to use this as an individual and collective wake-up call that will ultimately bring Moshiach and the Geula through our efforts of finishing and crossing the finish line, tipping the scales. One thought, one good word, one good action tips the scales and brings the world and each of us individually, personal and global, redemption and Geula. So as we enter the month of Adar Sheni, Mishenichnas Adar, Marbim B'Simcha, now a double, and qualitatively double Simcha, Mismar Geula, may it lead us straight into the Geula, even before Purim, and definitely before Pesach, and should be L'Shana Haba B'Yerushalayim, not Haba next year, but now, automatically will be all united, reunited in Yerushalayim, Ir HaKodesh. This has been My Life Chassidus Applied, episode 488. We're here every Sunday, 8 to 9 p.m. A freilichen Chodesh Adar, a freilichen Tamid, a freilichen life for all Eden everywhere, especially in Eretz Yisrael. May we march straight into V'simcha Selam al Reisham, the Geula Amitis V'Ashlema.
This program is brought to you by My Life, Chassidus Applied. Please help us continue our programs. Make even a small contribution at chassidusapply.com/donate.